Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Sivam Velaidam, and welcome to our Open Up podcast. We have an amazing guest today. He will share his life experience, but before that, I would like to share a couple of information with you guys. Voice Women 360 is a non-profit organization founded in 2020 in London, Ontario, Canada, dedicated to supporting men and boys through life challenges. We align with the International Men's Day movement and its six pillars, which promote the well being of men and boys worldwide. Open Up creates a safe, inclusive space for people from all walks of life to share their life journeys, challenges, and triumphs. The program airs Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, featuring one guest per episode. Before I introduce our special guest for today, I would like to review our disclaimer. We would like to remind everyone that Voice of Men 360 is committed to promoting peaceful harmony in all of our interactions. The views and opinions shared by our speakers are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Voice of Men 360. Please note that our content is not a substitute for professional, medical, or therapeutic advice. If you are struggling with personal challenges, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a qualified expert. For questions or concerns about today's episode or any of our content, feel free to email us at info@voiceomen360.org. Like I said, we have an amazing guest for today. Uh, his name is Richmond Heath from all the way from Australia. But before I bring him, I just want to share one more announcement, important announcement. Canada's men and boys health strategy. The government of Canada is engaging provincial and territorial governments, indigenous partners, and key stakeholders to develop a men and boys health strategy. The goal is to create supportive and safe environments, challenges harmful stereotypes, reduce stigma, and encourage men of all ages to seek help when they need it. Improving health of men and boys is a shared effort. The factors that lead to poor health outcomes for men and boys are complex and interrelated and don't begin in adulthood. Join the conversation. Your voice is important. Complete the questionnaire by June 1st, 2026. I'm going to share the link. I will display later on. You can join whoever is watching. Please make sure you go and submit your questionnaire, complete your questionnaire. That will help to develop a strategy. Um, Here we go. We have an amazing guest. Today we have Richmond Heath, psychotherapist and somatic educator, founder of TRE Australia. Welcome, Richmond. Thank you for joining.
Thanks very much for having me on, Sivam.
Absolutely, great pleasure because people like yourself, it's always great pleasure to have you and things understanding from different perspective, right? Let's talk about, I mean, a couple of areas we're going to discuss how shaking releases stress and trauma, why talking alone rarely works, why learning to let go is a crucial skill for men. I want to start with the first question. Why first made you realize that the body carries stress and trauma in ways most men never fully understand?
Mm. So in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, basically what happened for me, Sivam, was my body started to break down. So I had chronic low back pain. to the point at one time where I couldn't even walk up and down stairs because of the neurological weakness in my leg. I had shoulder impingement, so I couldn't lift my arms above my shoulders without chronic pain. So I couldn't swim anymore. I had Achilles tendonitis, so I couldn't run anymore. And literally, it felt like everything I used to do to keep myself feeling happy, which was generally exercise and sport, I wasn't able to do it. And psychologically, I sort of thought I was okay and fine, but it was my body that started to really grind down. And I didn't know it at the time. Because I was a physiotherapist, had been taught these are all just, muscular issues, physical tension that need to be strengthened or stretched. And then it was only when I started looking into meditation, because I'd tried all the other treatments and nothing was really working for me, working on that just purely physical level, and went to a 10-day Vipassana meditation course. I did a number of those, but on the third one of those, my body started to spontaneously move itself and release some of those patterns. So for me, it was very much this sense that everything that I was trying to treat my body in the normal way that I'd been trained to really wasn't working, and I had to try and find other ways to feel okay.
I believe I can sense that it's kind of like a painful trauma at the same time. It's a process we had to accept some sort of suffering. At the same time, it's a learning process too right now, because when you look at those things, now you can teach from those learning experiences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the time, I had no idea really that I was someone who'd been living with high functioning anxiety for most of my life. So, I was high achieving at school. I was high achieving in my sport. I went in to do physiotherapy. I was kind of keeping up, but it was like the handbrake was always somewhere, it was on, like when you're driving a car with a handbrake, there was always something deeper inside it. And I just always, I knew that I was a fairly sensitive and often fairly intense person, like felt things very intensely. But it was only later on when I got introduced to TRE and starting to understand about how the body sort of responds to stress and anxiety and trauma, and then also how it resolves that itself, that I was able to make those links of going, oh, wow, all these physical injuries, conditions that I was carrying were linked to. And it's not so much linked to the stress and trauma that I experienced as a child or throughout my life, or when I went to boarding school where I lived in hypervigilance for 4 years. But it's more to do with the state of my nervous system and my muscular system in the aftermath of that. And a great example was some time ago, there was a study called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Event Study. And it showed that people who'd had a number, like 4 or more significant sort of traumas in their life. It could have been, the parents divorced. It could have been a parent who was incarcerated in jail. It could have been physical or emotional abuse. There was a number of different things, but significant traumas. And when they tracked them across the lifetime, they found that it, more than doubled their chances of having heart attacks or strokes, cancer, suicidality. So that was a groundbreaking study that recognized that the unresolved stress and trauma that a lot of us are, we use the term carrying, and I don't quite like that, because it's more that our body is still activating these protective responses long after the original event has happened. And it's that then creates the secondary, conditions, which often don't show up until later life as medical conditions or mental health conditions, which until we start to understand stress and trauma, we don't even necessarily realize that they're linked.
Absolutely. It's a lot of layers that interrelated or interconnected, but at the same time, it's very hard to process it or hard to understand. Most of us, we don't really care, or we don't really know what's going on inside of the body, right? Even mind and body. That's where I want to take the next question. Many men are taught to push through stress silently. From your experience, what happens to the body and mind when emotions are continually suppressed instead of processed?
Mm. So, look, the first thing to be really clear about is the ability of men and women as well, but all people, but the ability to put aside our body and push through things. It's a normal human mammalian skill. Okay. So, if the bushfire is coming and we just have to fight and fight and fight for days on end and not sleep, it's a great skill to be able to do that. So that's not wrong or bad. But mind over matter only takes us so far, and eventually the body's going to catch up with us. So I always like to say to people, the next time you do your fire walking, and again, a wonderful skill to learn how the mind can override the body and the fear and that sort of thing. But I always like to say to people, what happens if you walk for an extra 50 meters on those coals? Eventually the body's going to, the response of the body is going to limit you. You're probably going to find you're going to burn your feet. So it's not that ignoring the body or pushing through is wrong or bad. It's a skill. But what we often lose is at the other end of the spectrum, where we have the capacity then to relax and unwind and let that sort of disconnection switch off. And that's ultimately what it is the way that we can split our mind from our body. We can focus on what we want to focus on, and it comes often at the cost of the body. And I love the analogy of the iceberg, where there's only a tiny percentage is above the waterline that we can see, and that's what our conscious mind is aware of. But then everything else below the surface, basically our neuromuscular system, is operating in an unconscious or subconscious or subcortical way. And so when we chronically disconnected from the body, and that often just shows up as tension and bracing that we're not even aware of until many, many years down the track, where that chronic tension starts to create secondary problems with, injuries and physical injuries, or, even literally linking into mental health conditions there. So it comes at the cost of disconnecting from the body. And with that is also vitality and aliveness, where we often start to become a little bit more numb to feeling that all the nuances life, both the positives and the negatives, the grief and the glory, the happy times and the sad times. So it comes, I think, a lot at the cost where we start to lose our real sense of vitality and living in a breathing, pulsating human body.
I would say like it's a lot of interesting areas to explore. At the same time, it will take some time to understand what's going on. All right. What do you think of? You often speak about shaking and trembling as a natural way to release stress and trauma. Why do you believe modern society, especially men, have become disconnected from these natural body response?
Yeah. And so, look, you raise a really interesting point where you say it's so complex trying to understand what's happening in the body. But if we look at it from a different angle, Sivam, it's not complex for the body. The body knows exactly what it's doing. The human body has evolved over millions of years. And so it's not actually a complex process to the body. So all the people listening out there, all of us, none of us are choosing to be stressed or to be anxious or to be angry or to be numb and disconnected and depressed and shut down. So it is not a conscious cognitive process at all. All right. If it was, we would all just choose to be enlightened and happy, and no one would ever have anything happen or any struggle that we weren't choosing to. So the first step is recognizing that our stress and our trauma and anxiety, all of these responses are body-based responses below the level of our conscious control. And if you can consciously choose to let them go, then just do it. All right. And you're fixed and it's sorted. But the limit is we don't have conscious control over most of our bodily processes, or it takes years and years and years of deep training and meditation to learn to do so. But at the same time, our human body, like most mammals, has also evolved with similar completely unconscious processes happening outside our conscious awareness and control to release those stress and trauma patterns. And when we understand that stress and trauma at its most basic level is first and foremost about the movement system, either generating movement through the fight or flight response, or more significantly containing and immobilizing movement, which is what we would call the freeze or the flop response. When we recognize the trauma state, the immobility state, the way that we need to resolve that is to restore movement and flexibility and pulsation back in the body. And this is where the shaking and trembling response that everyone listening to this has either experienced for ourselves or we've seen other people shaking and trembling. So if you come across someone after a car accident and their body's shaking, we've all been told, oh, they're in shock. You've got to stop that. Or if we're at the gym and you're doing weights and then you get to the point where your body starts to shake, then we've all been told that's just weakness. And, you need to override that and control that. The same thing if we're public speaking and our hands start shaking, we would all been told that's anxiety. But that shaking is not helping our body to fight or to flee or to freeze and immobilize. The shaking and trembling is the way that the body releases the immobility response. It's the way that it uses up the adrenaline that we get when we get a little shock or a fright or panic or when we're angry. And it uses up that adrenaline to bring us back to homeostasis, but without having to act it out. And this is really significant. We call this in our work neurogenic movement, simply meaning that the nervous system is generating the movements. It's not me generating it consciously. In the same way that if you have a shock, we don't think, oh, I've got to lift my shoulders up, I've got to pull my stomach in, I've got to take a big breath with my diaphragm, I've got to brace my jaw. All of those processes happen unconsciously. And it's the same way that the body knows how to release those patterns and come back out of the stress and trauma response. And it's no different to anyone out there who's got dogs. If there's a thunderstorm or they get scared, their body starts to shake and tremble. So this is a natural mammalian recovery response that in most cultures, and Western cultures especially, we've all just completely misunderstood it. We've been told that if you're shaking, that's part of having a panic attack. But it's not having a panic attack at all. Yes, you might have had a panic experience, but the shaking is not part of the panic attack. It is the discharge of that response so that we can let our system come back to a calm, relaxed physiological state. And the research is very clear, Sivam, but even back in the 70s, if you have a major traumatic event, if your physiology gets back to a completely true, calm and relaxed place, soon after that event, you basically will not get PTSD or post-traumatic stress. But most of us, what happens is we understand intellectually that the event is finished, that the car crash is over, that I'm not in the war zone, that the abuse is finished, whatever it might be. But physiologically, the body is still acting and carrying. Again, carrying is not a good word. Its state is still organized as if it still has to protect itself from that event. It's like it hasn't yet finished in the body. And this is where the magic of allowing the body to complete those responses, to release those stress and trauma patterns, this is what the shaking mechanism is in our Western culture. And unfortunately, that it's completely stigmatized. So as soon as we start shaking, if we're public speaking, we're going to lock that down because we've all been told that it's weakness and fear and anxiety, when it's completely the opposite. It's not a symptom, it's the solution. And while it's incredibly complex to understand how the body is doing that, the body doesn't need to understand it at an intellectual level. It doesn't really care. It just needs the opportunity to let this natural recovery response activate and literally shake us back to a more calm and relaxed state.
I want to ask you, if you can connect, let's say if you can go back to any client that you worked in, then easily, if you can connect those dots, okay, what this person went through, this kind of trauma or situation. You explained already about a car accident and things like that. But if you can go back any actual client, experience, and then, how did they come across, or how did they handle? Can you explain, take us back?
So look, there are lots of examples where people will come and they'll do they'll learn how to do the trembling and to activate it in a safe and controlled way. And the lens that I work through is TRE, or tension and trauma release exercises. And, I can think of numerous people who've come to workshops in chronic pain, especially like chronic low back pain. And there was one particular woman that I'll never forget, where on the first day she came to the workshop and she had a massive, big, thick foam mattress, like it must have been 15, 20 centimeters thick. And she explained to me that she had to bring that because she couldn't lie on anything else that was any softer than that, or any thinner than that, because her back would hurt. So anyway, she did the lay down on the floor. She lay down on a mattress. She did the tremoring. And on the second day of the workshop, I remember looking around the room, and all of a sudden she's kind of looks a bit frustrated, and she's got off the mattress, pushed the mattress to the side, and lay down on the wooden floor and kept tremoring. So at the end of the session, I sort of, went over. I said, "What happened to the mattress?" And she said, while she was trembling, her pain had all started to go away. And actually, she was starting to feel a bit irritated that the mattress was so soft. And she felt like her body needed to be on a much more firm surface. So, and then she was trembling on the wooden floor. This is after decades of chronic pain. All of a sudden, she's going, "I don't need that now. My body feels okay." And that can sound extraordinary, and it is. But when we understand that our stress and tension and our even pain responses is something that our body is generating, then all we're looking for is to find the off switch where the body can flick that response off. I always like to explain that stress and trauma, Sivam, are verbs. So they're not nouns. I haven't got pain. Pain's not something that's inside me. It's something that the body is generating. It doesn't mean it's made up in my head, but it's in the same way that if I've got a dog phobia and someone brings me a fluffy white puppy, my body generates a flight response, which we would call anxiety, and I want to run away. It's the same thing with pain. We don't have pain receptors. Our body generates the experience of pain as a way of helping us immobilize. And this is where understanding, if we can get the body to switch that response off, then the pain and the suffering and the tension and the unresolved trauma along with it can literally just fall away in an instant. It often doesn't, and it's often a more ongoing process. But when we understand that, then we understand the value of using this trembling mechanism to help switch off our chronic stress and trauma responses.
What I want to ask is that it's because since we're talking about mostly focusing men's and boys, things like that. In any case, what's the difference when you deal with the men, and how? I mean, if you can mention any extreme cases, or not just regular cases, but extreme cases, or something is unusual that how did you handle, or how did they handle themselves, in order to come out, let's say, any domestic violence or any trauma, even from the childhood, or any major trauma,
So look, rather than trying to go down to here's one person, here's their extreme response, what I'm more focused on, Sivam, is people understanding that when they use this tremor mechanism and it regulates their system and releases some of the stress and tension, I get people to focus on what direction is this process moving their system in. And what everybody finds is it's literally starting to calm their system down, so that people who are perhaps, chronically anxious will start to go, wow, I can feel periods where I'm a little bit more calm and relaxed. Or people who are chronically angry or really hyperreactive will often find, wow, in this situation when normally I would fly off the handle, I was a little bit more calm and grounded. Or people who are depressed, where their systems, chronically shut down, will start to feel more, literally start to come back to, feeling and sensing in their body. And the reason I tend to focus on that is, again, classically as men, it's like, give me the thing, I just want the magic bullet, do this, and then all of a sudden I'm healed. And we tend to get focused on those sort of, those stories that sometimes happen. But what's much more important is using this process to literally ground and calm our nervous system over the time. Because once we learn to use this, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, men can be lying in bed and shaking and trembling just before they go to sleep, and it's going to improve their sleep. And a lot of first responders and veterans and military personnel around the world, that's one of the primary things they use it for, is to switch off and sleep more deeply. But because this process is inside ourselves, once we learn, we understand, hey, this is a positive recovery response. And once we learn how to access it and use it, then the most valuable thing is we have got it there for life. And a little bit like if you go to the gym once, It's like saying, I didn't all of a sudden become super strong. I trained my system. Or if you do a weekend mindfulness course, if you don't keep practicing, you're not going to train those pathways. So this is where, for me, rather than focusing on what's the magical outcome and we all get excited that, oh, maybe it's going to fix me instantly, is being in a very grounded way, understanding that this is a process that will physiologically mature our nervous system over time, and that we've got free access to it. It costs us nothing. And why it's particularly valuable for men is because we don't have to use our mind to focus. We don't have to talk about the past. We don't have to use a lot of physical effort. So when you're most tired and fatigued, you can lie down and the body generates the process and the movements itself. So the body does the letting go. We don't even really have to let go. We just lie there and the body lets go for us. And this is really critical, because one of the misnomers that I see, and especially that's being put onto men, is you've always got to talk about your emotions, you've got to talk about your feelings, and you've got to feel more. Whereas, and I would say that, so the model has been that the deepest part of our human experience is emotional. And I find this often is presented to us often by women, and because that's often how they experience things. But deeper than the emotional levels of our experience is the movement system. And this is where, when the body is able to release those tension patterns, the movement patterns, the bracing patterns that are underneath our emotions, we will often find that we don't even necessarily have to have an emotional experience or an emotional release. We often don't even have to have a story, because most of the patterns established in our bodies are, pre-verbal from the first 2 or 3 years of life and in utero and earlier. So we're often not even going to have a story. We have stress and trauma in our life, and talking about it can be really useful. But why this process is so valuable is it can bypass our cognitive thinking mind. It can go deeper into our experience than our emotions, and the body is able to release and reorganize these patterns without us necessarily having to even do much at all. And from that place, then when we start talking and sharing, exploring together, it's already coming from a much more grounded and integrated place.
Absolutely. It's especially when we talk about men, you know, a lot of times, suppressed, and then they don't know which channel they can go through, or how to channelize their emotions, right? At the same time, the way we always, under pressure, right? So it's a lot of areas we need to explore. That's what I can understand. At the same time, that it's a very interesting. Of course, I'm not expert, or I'm not very good in that space, but I can understand. I can connect some dots and then see how things works. But it's a lot to explore and then understand in the long run. Like you said, the body and the mind, you cannot really get the result right away. It will take some time. You have to keep sometimes to practice gradually, one at a time, and then probably in the long run, 6 months or so, you will see amazing result. It's the same way, like you mentioned. Let's move on to this one. You have mentioned that talking alone often isn't enough for healing. What are some limitations of traditional talk-based approaches when it comes to men's mental health and trauma recovery?
Mm. So one way to think about this is, first of all, that our stress and trauma responses, again, I've mentioned this already, they're not cognitively chosen. They're not cognitive processes. So the body responds to stress and trauma below the level of our cognition. And this is why I say, if you can talk about your stress and trauma and you can choose consciously to let it go, well, then just do it. And that's going to be effective. But that's the limitation. And an easy way for people to think about this is, if you think about balance, literally the ability to stand up against gravity and not fall over. Balance is a process which is completely organized by the brainstem, our spinal cord, the neuromuscular system. It's not a cognitive process at all. So if you had balance problems and I said, okay, Sivam, come here, lie on the couch. Now we're going to talk about balance. And we could talk about balance until the cows come home, but that's not going to have any effect on the systems that actually organize your balance. And it's very much the same for stress and trauma, where the processes of the body in terms of generating those protective stress and trauma responses, they're not conscious, they're not cognitive. And so this is why when we try to access them consciously only, if we're only doing that, it's often not allowing the body to respond. So to be really clear though, I'm not saying that talk therapy of itself is not wrong or bad, but if we're talking and our body is not moving and responding at the same time, then it's not going to really have much effect. But anyone who's ever done men's work and you've been in a circle, and when we're sharing and we're talking about stuff that's happening, it's the body responses where we start to release that pressure and we feel things start to move. And that's the key thing, is that if we're talking about stuff, it's what's happening in the physiology of the body. And unfortunately, in our Western world, where we've got the Descartian split between the mind and body, so counselors aren't taught anything about the body, and physiotherapists and massage therapists aren't taught anything much about the mind. So we split it into, stress and trauma is a psychology or counseling. So it's not that talking in itself is not effective, but if we're talking about things, but the body is not able to move and release itself, that's when it starts to become less effective. And as I mentioned earlier, these patterns in our physiology are established in utero and in the first few years of our life. So no matter what we're talking about, we're probably never going to have a story or a narrative linked to these deepest primal stress and trauma responses in our physiology. But this is where the body knows how to unwind them, when we just get out of the way and we stop suppressing the movement. So I could be counseling, I could say a very bad thing happened to me, and yes, it was terrible, and I could tell you the entire story. But if I'm not letting my diaphragm shake and that's not able to move, then the talk therapy is never really going to get us anywhere. So it's not about talk therapy is wrong, but it's about we have to incorporate the body, and not just focusing and talking about the trauma and the stress responses. Oh, my body's tight, it's doing that. But letting the body to move and express itself and unwind itself through this magical neurogenic sort of movement response that, like all mammals, we've all got.
Absolutely. From my understanding, that holistic approach, I would say, because not only a mind, at the same time, the muscles memory, it has to move, or it has to listen, and then you had to, everything is interconnected. So you cannot just say, you know what, you and me are talking, but it's nothing is happening. Of course, I'm sharing a lot of areas, but it's not really helping me at the end. So it's just a sharing for my mouth. That's all right?
That's right. I often say that when we're talking, we're often releasing stress and trauma from our jaw because those muscles are moving. But I want to summarize it like this, Sivan, because I think people will understand this. Most people understand the concept of muscle memory. And this is where we're at in the stress and trauma worlds. Like, my body remembers, my body's carrying that. It's learnt that pattern of bracing and holding. So most people get that. But what we're talking about with this spontaneous shaking and trembling response is that the body also has the muscle memory of how to let that tension and that stress and that trauma go. And that's where it literally starts to shake and tremble and vibrate. So we've got muscle memory of our trauma, but deeper inside our human organism, our muscle memory also knows how to release that when we just get out of the way and let it go. But again, in our current culture, we think shaking and trembling is a symptom, so we suppress it. And it's very much similar to the way that, and you're in Canada, so you're going to have mammals up there that go into hibernation for the winter. And when we look at the way mammals come back to life, coming out of those deep survival states, their body starts to shake and tremble. Literally, it has the muscle memory where the muscles and the nervous system start to move and shake and vibrate themselves. And that's how the body of the mammal starts to come back to life, even before the mammal has come back online consciously, even before its eyes have opened. So this is the magic, sort of this magic thing that we've overlooked in our culture, that the body has the muscle memory to release and resolve these stress and trauma patterns to get us back to a more naturally calm and relaxed state. And so when we access that, and as our state becomes more grounded, as men and as humans, we are naturally designed to be calm and relational and in relationship with people. So a lot of the behavioral issues we have and we see is because this neurogenic pathway to calm us back down has effectively been locked and shut down culturally, individually, medically. So when that emergency exit for the stress and trauma is not there, we have that pressure inside us, and that's when things start to leak out in terms of behaviors. Like you talk about domestic violence and that frustration, often for men, much more in the fight response than the flight response, or other men who are then getting completely shut down because there's no way for them to let this tension out, because in our models, it's got to come out emotionally or behaviorally as anger or frustration or fury or smashing stuff, way less effective than letting it literally shake out. And unfortunately, that's when people get into those states of deep depression and sadly suicide, where they're going, there's no way for this to escape. And that pressure is inside us. And that's when people have got, there's no way to get this pressure out. Then unfortunately, people start to look at those, go into those states, again, driven by physiological responses. So this is the key thing, is know that we have the muscle memory in our human organism to release stress and tension and trauma. It's not a magic bullet, but that's the key thing that I hope people take away from this, because once you access it, it's like all of a sudden the emergency exit is there, and there's a pathway for us to start to resolve some of the unresolved stress, trauma, suffering, anxiety, frustration, fury, anger, that without that process, we don't know how to let it go or release it without having to act it out or behave it. And of course, we don't want to do that because it has negative consequences on ourselves and often others.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, a lot of men struggle with the idea of letting go because it can feel like weakness, loss of control, or vulnerability. How can men begin reframing letting go as a strength rather than a failure? What do you think?
Yeah, so there's two things here. The first is that when people experience this spontaneous shaking and trembling response, when they have that experience where their body's taking over, and then afterwards they feel better, they have an embodied experience of going, hang on, when I let go and relax and let my body lead, I actually get to a better place. And that was what happened to me. Sivan was on the meditation retreat. I'd been doing everything I could do to try and fix my body. That was as a physiotherapist. It was up to me and my knowledge and my skills and my techniques to fix the body. But when I just was meditating and I stopped doing things, I got to that point where my body started to move, and it just freed me up in a way that I could never have possibly imagined. And so it was having that embodied experience. And that's the beauty of when we do TRE. People have the experience of going, wow, I lay down, I let my body move itself, and I feel a bit better. And so the process itself actually helps. But in terms of another model, if we think about the ancient samurai warriors, who are famous, and all the films that are made of them being superhuman powers, spinning up onto the roof, being the most lethal focused, Zen masters one moment and lethal warriors the next. They actually practice something called seikijutsu. And one part of this secret martial art was that they would meditate to the point where their body started to spontaneously move itself. And that was one of the secret practices they had that allowed them to be Zen masters one moment and lethal warriors the next. So there's this balance, having control, directing, creating life. That's a wonderful skill. But that's the only end of the spectrum that most of us in the Western culture have been given and inherited, are told. It's all up to us as men to make things happen and do things. Again, wonderful skill. But what we're all generally missing is the ability to then switch off, let go, let the body move us so that we sleep like babies at the end of the day, complete relaxation, and find that peace. And that's the pathway to that deep inner peace that most of us are missing and have lost, because ultimately that's a physiological process that the ancient samurai knew, the balance between action and letting go, or, directing and receiving and allowing. So I think that's a wonderful model for men out there. If you want to be a samurai warrior, you've got to know how to do both. And most of us have spent our entire life focused on the doing rather than the being. And this is the beautiful experience we have with TRE. When the body starts to shake and tremble itself, we're not even doing it. All we're doing is learning how to just relax and surrender. And ultimately, Sivam, that is what a flow state is. You know, those magical moments when we're out of our thinking mind and our skills and our training take over and our body is sort of doing the process for ourselves. This is something else that this shaking and trembling affords us, is learning how to let go and fall into flow.
This is very important for men. Of course, it's not lot to learn, but at the same time, it's just to take some time for themselves and then take care of themselves. Because the thing is, like a lot of time, you know, in the last number of decades, we are running around, under pressure and then dealing with a lot of things, right? So it's when you say, balancing, it's must, especially nowadays, because when we look at the number, the suicide rate, 78 to 80% around the world, we are losing a lot of lives as we are speaking. So it's very, very important, critical, that especially men, they have to take care of themselves, at least give create a space for them and then see how they can help themselves. Absolutely. So probably 30, 36 years, you are working with thousands of people, especially men too, globally. What patterns have you noticed in men who successfully improve their mental health, physical well-being, and relationship over time?
Look, I think it's completely multifactorial. Really, that's the key thing. There's no one singular thing. So I think keeping it really simple, there's a few key things. Diet is really important and far more important than most of us often think about until life catches up and we start to get sick and we have to deal with our diet. That's a critical one. But I also think that for me, I often like to talk about sort of the 3 R's. So the first one is relationships. And when I did Aboriginal Studies course many, many years ago, and that was sort of my key takeaway in real learning, is about the value of relationships. And I don't just mean relationships with other people, but relationships with animals, with country, with land, with life itself. So being in that relational space, so many of us as men feel so isolated and independent. So often it is, men's work, and having those good human relationships is significant. The second big one is sort of regulation, or that we're talking about, taking care of ourselves so that we're not just winding up and getting more and more stressed and more burnt out, that we have processes where we can get back into that natural cycle of, the in-breath, the out-breath, being really active, but being able to calm down and rest. I think that's men who thrive and do well tend to start to find more balance with that rather than just always being switched on. And then probably the biggest one, I think, Sivam, is having a reason to live, a reason to be of service. I was just reading an article in the paper just recently about a guy in Australia who was going to go to jail. I can't remember whether it was for drug trafficking or whatever it was, but he just said he had 3 reasons to live and get through that process. One was his partner, and the other 2 were his 2 children. And whether it's a family, or whether it's a purpose, or whether it's a reason, or whether it's a cause, whether we're of service to our local community or whatever it might be, I think ultimately, in order for us to have some sort of thriving in life, we have to have a reason to be living and doing what we're doing. And for anyone out there who hasn't heard of the book Lost Connections, written by Johann Hari, I highly recommend it. He's a brilliant writer, and he looks at, basically depression and what's happening in the world. And one of the big studies that he references in that book was where they looked at people all around the world in different countries who were doing things to try and make themselves happier. And this was a huge study with tens of thousands of people. And the results they found were quite fascinating, was that in the Western countries like America and Australia, the people who were doing things to make themselves feel better didn't actually get better. But in a lot of the Eastern countries, or the more traditional societies, which were more communal in nature, those people who did things to get better, they started to feel happier. And what they found was that in the more traditional societies, or the more community-based societies, when people wanted to do things to make themselves feel better, they went and did things for other people. Whereas in the West, we tend to go and do things for ourselves. I'll get a massage for myself. I'll get a manicure. I'll get my hair done. I'll buy myself a new toy. I will do something for me to try to make me feel better. And in a nutshell, I think that was the clearest thing. It just basically, it doesn't work. We get a short-term benefit. So that sense of being in relationship and being of service and having a purpose, I think that's, one of the most critical things that in our Western model for men, we don't get taught that a lot. It's like the successful man has got the biggest car, the most beautiful partner, the best car, the best house, all that sort of thing, achieves the most, earns the most. That's kind of just, the cultural overlay, rather than going, look, all of those things of themselves are not necessarily wrong or bad, but what's the purpose? And, unfortunately, we live in an incredibly individualistic culture. I think that's probably the most significant factor, is that sense of being of community, being belonging in somewhere and being of benefit and service, which, again, I think a lot of traditional cultures and rites of passage for boys and men was all about getting into your sense of belonging and service to something bigger and other than ourselves.
I think that's a huge missing point or missing gap. I would say, like a bit, especially with men, especially nowadays with the young men, because they don't have, they don't aware, or they are not in the state to find out their reason for living or the purpose, whatever they want to do. Because the thing is, like, many men, we taught, especially even in the Western world, like after material, finance, and everything, but nothing purposefully. You want to do something, you want to do something for yourself, or others, or for the community, or for the environment, things like that, right? So sometimes you run a mechanical life, and then you can only achieve certain things, and then after that you stop. You cannot move anymore. But when you have a reason, when you have a purpose, and then the purpose will drive you. So you don't have to worry too much, or you don't have to have stress too much. You don't have to go through a lot of suffering, I would say. Makes sense, I think. So I have a few announcements quickly. I just want to share, and then I will come back to you, a few more questions to you, Richmond. Stay there. Friends, we are watching Richmond Heath from all the way from Australia. He's sharing his experiences. I have few announcements, quick announcements. We have next week on this Saturday, May 16th, for the World Day of the Boy Child. We're going to have a panel discussion in the evening, 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. You can see these amazing individuals will be speaking, sharing their experiences, talking about the World Day of the Boy Child, boys to men, challenges, opportunities, and strategies. It's going to be on May 16th from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join. Absolutely, it will be live on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, so you can watch it, and then you can share your comments too. And we are working on Voice of Men 360. We are working on a autism and special caregivers, which is male caregivers. We want to run a project, and then we have a Google Docs survey form that I'm going to display shortly, and then you guys can even yourself or whoever is a male caregivers. So please go to that Google form and then fill out so this way we can actually get the result, and then we can include in our proposal, so we can possibly run a project later on. So this is very important. Please help us with male caregivers. So that's very important. And then we have an open up. That's what you are watching right now, is sharing your life experience, life journey on Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And then Bully is a Tamil live talk show. It's on Sundays at 8 a.m. Eastern time. And also monthly men's group meeting only for men by men, second Saturday of every month from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. No recordings. Please join through Zoom. The link is available on our Facebook page and group. There are no limitations on gender, age, nationality, or ethnicity. People from all walks of life can participate in any of our shows. If you like to be a guest on any of our shows or are interested in joining our organization, whether directly or indirectly, please reach out to us. We would love to work with individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials, and businesses. The phone number is 226-289-8784. Again, the phone number is 226-289-8784. Email address is info@voiceomen360.org. Website is www.voiceomen360.org. Facebook, we have a group and page. Please join our Facebook group and page. Other social media platforms are Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Voiceover 360. We have probably, I would say, more than 600 episodes on various topics. You can go and watch it. Please help us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Okay, coming back to Richmond. This is a one-word question: healing or hustle? What do you think?
Healing.
Absolutely. Control or surrender?
Both.
Okay. Strength or vulnerability?
What was the first one?
Strength.
Both.
Both. Body or mind?
Both.
Both. Exactly. Release or resistance?
Release.
Yes. Last question. If every man listening today could begin practicing just one simple self-care habit to improve his well-being, what would you want that habit to be, and why?
So I would want that to be whatever habit it is that is going to be most helpful for them. That's really it, because then it's going to be sustainable, it's going to be meaningful for them, and they're going to have that sovereignty to say this is what's most helpful. So I think ultimately that's it. But if you're looking for suggestions, then I would recommend, I'd love that every man on the planet and every person on the planet would actually know how to access and use their body's natural own internal organic release mechanism through spontaneous shaking and trembling. And there's lots of different modalities and approaches. And, the one that I use, which I think personally is one of the most simple and effective models and lenses and ways, is through TRE, or the tension and trauma release exercises. So that would be, I would love people to, first of all, understand that if their body's shaking and trembling after a stressful or a traumatic event, to let that happen. That is the natural recovery process. But more importantly, I'd love people to know that they can access and use this mechanism on demand whenever and wherever you need to release stress and tension, but also build resilience in the nervous system and become more grounded and more physiological mature over time. So if you're interested in learning TRE, during COVID, I created the world's first online TRE course. It's had about 14,000 people through it. It's at trecourse.com. It's got 3 guided sessions, really a bit of background information, but it's the basics of everything you need to know to get started. So you've got access to this neurogenic release mechanism, and that you know that. But yeah, I'm very biased, obviously, because that's my sort of passion and that's my calling. But I do think ultimately it's about men finding whatever it is that is most meaningful and most effective for them.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Richmond. I'm going to share your social media handlings and also your contact details, especially website and everything. And people can absolutely reach out to you. There are a lot of areas I can say definitely you guys want to explore. And So feel free to contact Richmond. He's an amazing guy. You can see that, and then it will, of course, not only you but also benefit other people too. So please reach out to him and then check out his website and things like that. Thanks a lot once again. It's a always a great pleasure to have you. It's more than 36 years of experience working with men and women and thousands of people. It's just a lot of areas that we want to still discover, but we really want to bring you back and then discover more. Please, thank you. Thanks a lot for joining today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sivam. It's a pleasure, and thanks for the work that you're doing. You know, we as a man, we know that we need love and support and care and nurturing and more health and well-being. So it's great that these places and this space that you're creating is available. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Take care. Thanks.